The sound of a shotgun blast ripped through the tense silence of the Calloway family ranch, sending Deanna Calloway scrambling beneath her bed as heavy boots stomped up the staircase toward her bedroom. It was May 1876, and at 20 years old, Deanna had endured her father's drunken rages for as long as she could remember. But tonight felt different. There was a murderous intent in his eyes she'd never seen before, even on his worst days. "You ungrateful little wretch." Jedediah Calloway's voice boomed through the closed door as Deanna's trembling fingers clutched the small canvas bag she kept packed for just such an emergency. "You think you can embarrass me in front of the whole town by refusing Harrison's proposal? I've already spent his dowry money." Deanna's heart hammered against her ribs as she heard the doorknob rattle. Harrison Miller was 53 years old, more than twice her age, with 3 previous wives who'd all mysteriously died after short marriages. The prosperous banker had been eyeing Deanna for years, waiting until she was of age, and her father had been all too willing to sell her for the price of clearing his gambling debts. "Pa, please," she called out, voice quavering as she slipped out from her hiding place and moved toward the window. "I can't marry him. You know what they say about his other wives." The door splintered as Jedediah's boot connected with the wood. His bloodshot eyes fixed on his daughter standing by the window, her honey blonde hair falling loose around her shoulders, her mother's features reflected in the delicate lines of her face. It only seemed to enrage him further. "You look just like her, just as disobedient," he slurred, raising the shotgun. "If you won't obey me and do what's right for this family, then you're no use to me at all." Deanna didn't hesitate. She threw herself through the window, the glass shattering around her as she tumbled onto the sloped roof below. Pain lanced through her arms where the glass had cut her, but adrenaline propelled her forward. She scrambled across the roof, hearing her father's curses and another thunderous shotgun blast that sent splinters of wood flying near her head. The ground rushed up to meet her as she leapt from the edge of the roof, landing hard in the soft dirt of her mother's long, neglected garden. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs, but Deanna forced herself to her feet, clutching her small bag of possessions to her chest as she ran toward the stables. Her mare Willow nickered softly as Deanna burst into the stable, tears streaming down her face as she quickly threw a saddle on the horse's back. Her fingers, slick with blood from the cuts on her arms, fumbled with the straps. "Come on, girl," she whispered, hearing her father's shouts growing closer. "We have to go now." As Deanna led Willow out the back of the stable, the night air hit her face, cool and crisp with the promise of freedom, but freedom to go where? Her father's influence stretched across the entire county. Harrison Miller owned the bank and half the businesses in town. There was nowhere she could hide that they wouldn't find her, unless she disappeared entirely. With that thought firmly in mind, Deanna spurred Willow into a gallop, heading west toward the open country, toward a new life or certain death. She couldn't be sure which. Dawn broke over the mountains as Deanna rode into the small settlement of Copper Creek. Her body ached from the long night's ride, and the cuts on her arms had dried into painful scabs. Willow moved with an exhausted gait beneath her. As they approached the only establishment showing signs of life at this early hour, a busy livery stable, where several cowboys were preparing for what appeared to be a cattle drive. Deanna pulled her hat low over her face, acutely aware of how she must look a young woman alone, clothes torn and bloodied, riding into town at dawn. She'd heard stories of girls in her situation, how quickly their options narrowed to the brothel or starvation. "Whoa there, miss, you all right?" The deep voice startled her, and Deanna nearly fell from her saddle as she turned to face a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark hair and piercing blue eyes studying her with concern. His weathered face suggested he was in his late 20s, though the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes hinted at a life lived primarily outdoors. "I'm fine," she managed, her throat dry from the dusty ride. "Just passing through." The man's eyes moved to the dried blood on her arms, visible where her torn sleeves exposed the skin. Doesn't look like fine to me. Name's Remington Quinn. Most folks call me Rem. I'm trail boss for the Quinn outfit. He gestured to the bustling activity around them. We're heading out with 3,000 head of cattle for Wyoming. Got a doctor traveling with us if you need those cuts looked at. Deanna hesitated, wariness battling with the desperate knowledge that she needed help. I don't have money to pay a doctor. Something in Rem's expression softened. Don't need money. Doc Simmons is on my payroll for the drive. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. Forgive me for being forward, miss, but you look like you're running from something or someone. I've been around long enough to recognize that look. Deanna's hand instinctively went to the revolver tucked in her saddlebag, her mother's old Colt that she'd taken before fleeing. I'm not in the business of turning away folks in need, Rem continued, especially not when they're clearly hurt. We've got a cook wagon with hot food and a spare tent where you can rest up before deciding where you're headed next. Why would you help a stranger? Deanna asked, suspicion evident in her voice. Rem's mouth quirked up at one corner, not quite a smile. Because 12 years ago I was that stranger running scared, nowhere to go. Someone helped me. Figure I owe it to pass along the kindness. He gestured to her horse. Your mare's about done in. Let her rest while you get those cuts seen to, at least. Deanna weighed her options. Her father wouldn't think to look for her with a cattle drive. And if the trail boss was telling the truth about heading to Wyoming, that would put hundreds of miles between her and Jedediah Calloway. I'm Deanna, she said finally, omitting her surname. And I accept your offer, Mr. Quinn, but only if there's some way I can earn my keep. I won't be a charity case. Rem nodded, a flash of respect in his eyes. Fair enough. Can you cook? Deanna thought of the years spent keeping house after her mother died. Yes, our cook could use help. 3 dozen hungry cowboys is a lot to feed. He reached up to help her down from her horse. Come on, let's get you and your mare taken care of. As Deanna slid from the saddle, her legs nearly buckled beneath her from exhaustion. Rem's strong hands steadied her, and she was struck by how gentle his grip was despite his obvious strength. Thank you, she whispered, unable to remember the last time someone had shown her kindness without expecting something in return. Don't thank me yet, Rem said with a hint of humor in his deep voice. You haven't tasted Cookie's coffee, might make you wish you'd taken your chances elsewhere. Despite everything, Deanna felt herself smile for the first time in what felt like years. 3 days into the cattle drive, Deanna had settled into a routine helping Cookie, an elderly, perpetually grumbling man, who seemed simultaneously irritated by her presence and grateful for the help. Her cuts had been cleaned and bandaged by Doc Simmons, who asked no questions about how she'd gotten them, and she'd been given a spare set of men's clothes that fit her well enough once she'd rolled up the sleeves and pant legs. You're putting too much coffee in that pot, girl, Cookie groused as Deanna prepared the morning brew. Trying to make their hearts explode before noon, Deanna smiled, already used to his complaints. You said yesterday it was too weak. Well, now it's too strong, Cookie shot back, but there was no real heat in his voice. He'd warmed to her considerably after discovering she could make a decent biscuit and wasn't afraid of hard work. The camp was coming alive around them as cowboys emerged from bedrolls, stretching stiff muscles and reaching for tin cups of the coffee Deanna was brewing. She kept her head down, still uncomfortable with the curious glances some of the men sent her way, mourning. Deanna looked up to find Rem standing by the chuck wagon, his hat pulled low over his eyes, stubble darkening his jaw after days on the trail. She'd seen little of him since that first day, as he was constantly moving up and down the line of cattle, giving orders and keeping the operation running smoothly. Morning, Mr. Quinn, she replied, pouring him a cup of coffee. Just Rem is fine. He accepted the cup, his fingers briefly brushing hers. How are those arms healing up? Deanna instinctively touched one of her bandaged forearms. Better. Doc says they'll be fine, no need for stitches. Rem nodded, taking a long drink of coffee before fixing her with a thoughtful look. Cookie tells me you're a hard worker, says you've got a knack for stretching provisions and keeping the men fed. He's exaggerating, Deanna demurred. I'm just doing what needs doing. That's rarer than you might think. Rem paused, lowering his voice. Look, I don't mean to pry, but it's my job to know who's traveling with my outfit. You've been looking over your shoulder every time a rider approaches from the east. You want to tell me what or who you're running from? Deanna stiffened, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. My father, she admitted quietly. He was going to force me to marry a man who's dangerous. When I refused, he tried to kill me. Rem's expression hardened. Your own father. He's not been much of a father since my mother died, Deanna said, the words bitter on her tongue. He drinks, gambles. The man he wanted me to marry, Harrison Miller, offered to clear my father's debts in exchange for me. And this Miller, he's the dangerous one. They say his previous wives died under suspicious circumstances, Deanna explained. 3 of them, all within a year of marriage. Nothing was ever proven, but you had good reason to run, Rem finished for her, his jaw tight. Deanna, I want to make something clear. You're safe with this outfit. Every man here answers to me, and I won't tolerate anyone bothering you. But I should tell you we'll be stopping in Willow Springs in about 2 weeks to resupply. If your father's looking for you, word might have spread that far. Fear clutched at Deanna's heart. What should I do? Rem seemed to consider something before speaking again. There's an option, though it's not ideal. The trail boss of a cattle drive, that's me, his authority is recognized pretty much everywhere we go. If you were, say, married to the trail boss, even your father would have a hard time claiming you back. Diana's eyes widened as his meaning became clear. Are you suggesting? A marriage of convenience, Rem clarified quickly. On paper only. It would give you protection under the law. You'd be Mrs. Quinn instead of Miss Calloway. Your father would have no legal claim to you. And what would you get out of this arrangement? Deanna asked warily. Something like pain flickered across Rem's features. Nothing except knowing I helped someone who needed it. When we reach Wyoming, if you want to go your separate ways, I'll arrange for an annulment. No strings attached. Deanna studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. She found none, only open honesty and what appeared to be genuine concern. You do that for a stranger? Rem gave a slight shrug. You're not exactly a stranger anymore, and I've seen how hard you work, how kind you are to Cookie despite his grumbling. How you helped Billy when he burned his hand on the coffee pot yesterday. He took a breath. I'm not proposing anything improper, Deanna. You'd have your own tent, just as you do now. This would be a business arrangement, nothing more. Deanna knew she should take more time to consider, but the practical side of her recognized the wisdom in his plan. With her father and Harrison Miller searching for her, being a married woman, especially to someone as clearly respected as Remington Quinn, would offer protection she desperately needed. All right, she said, surprising herself with her decisiveness. I accept your proposal, Mr. Quinn. The corner of Rem's mouth lifted in that not-quite smile she was beginning to recognize. Then I suppose we have a wedding to arrange next time we find a preacher or justice of the peace. Cookie, who had apparently been eavesdropping the entire time, cleared his throat loudly. Justice of the peace happens to be staying at the trading post we'll reach tomorrow. Saw it on the manifest before we left. When both Deanna and Rem turned to stare at him, the old cook shrugged. Just saying. Rem's laugh was unexpected, a deep, rich sound that Deanna found herself wanting to hear again. Well then, he said, his blue eyes meeting hers with warmth that made something flutter in her chest. Looks like tomorrow's the big day, Mrs. Quinn-to-be. The trading post was little more than a collection of rough-hewn buildings nestled in a valley beside a small creek. While most of the cowboys remained with the herd, Rem had brought Deanna, Cookie, and his foreman Tucker into the settlement to find the justice of the peace and acquire supplies. Deanna sat nervously on a bench outside the general store, wearing the only dress she owned, the one she'd fled in, now mended as best she could manage. Mrs. Evans, the shopkeeper's wife, had kindly helped her wash her hair and pin it up properly, commenting that it wasn't every day they had a bride at the trading post. "You look mighty pretty," said Tucker, a weathered man in his 40s who seemed perpetually amused by everything around him. "Rem's a lucky man." Deanna flushed, still uncomfortable with the charade they were perpetuating. "It's not a real marriage," she reminded him in a whisper. Tucker's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Maybe not in intention, but the vows you'll say are real enough, just remember that." Before Deanna could respond, Rem emerged from the general store and her breath caught in her throat. He'd shaved, his strong jaw now smooth, and he'd exchanged his dusty trail clothes for a clean white shirt and dark pants. His dark hair was still damp from washing, and he'd clearly made an effort to tame it. "Ready?" he asked, extending his hand to her. Deanna nodded, placing her fingers in his. "As ready as I'll ever be for my first wedding." A smile touched Rem's lips. "Mine too." The justice of the peace was a serious elderly man named Judge Michaels, who scrutinized them both with sharp eyes before agreeing to perform the ceremony. They gathered in the small room behind the trading post that served as the settlement's courthouse, with Tucker and Cookie as witnesses. "Do you have rings?" Judge Michaels asked. Rem looked momentarily abashed. "I didn't think I have something," Tucker interrupted, reaching into his pocket and producing a simple gold band. "My mother's. Been carrying it for luck these past 20 years. About time it served a proper purpose." Deanna was touched by the unexpected gesture. "Tucker, I couldn't consider it a loan," the foreman said with a wink, "until Rem here can get you a proper one." The ceremony itself was brief but oddly moving. Deanna felt a strange tightness in her chest as she repeated vows to honor and cherish a man she barely knew, yet who had shown her more kindness in a few days than she'd known in years. When Judge Michaels pronounced them man and wife, Rem hesitated for only a moment before leaning down to place a chaste, gentle kiss on her lips. It lasted barely a second, but Deanna felt it like a jolt through her entire body. "Congratulations, Mrs. Quinn," Rem said softly, his blue eyes searching hers for something she couldn't name. "Thank you," she whispered back, unsure if she was thanking him for the kiss or for the protection his name now offered her. That evening, back at camp, Cookie surprised them with a small cake he'd somehow managed to bake in his Dutch oven, and the Cowboys presented Rem with a bottle of whiskey they'd been saving. There was music from a harmonica and fiddle, and for a few hours, Deanna almost forgot that her marriage was merely an arrangement of convenience. When the celebrations died down, Rem walked her to her tent, now positioned slightly apart from the others to give the newlyweds privacy. "I want to thank you again," Deanna said when they reached the tent flap. "What you've done for me, I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Rem shook his head. "There's nothing to repay. I meant what I said when we reach Wyoming. You're free to go your own way if that's what you want." Deanna nodded, though she was surprised to find the thought didn't bring her the relief she expected. "Good night, then. Husband." Something flickered in Rem's eyes, a warmth that made her wonder, just for a moment, what it might be like if this marriage were real. "Good night, wife," he replied softly, before turning and walking back toward the campfire, leaving Deanna with confused feelings she wasn't ready to examine. The cattle drive continued northward, days blending into weeks as they moved the massive herd across the open range. Deanna settled into her role as helper to Cookie, but also found herself taking on other tasks, mending clothes, treating minor injuries when Doc Simmons was busy elsewhere, and even learning to ride alongside the chuck wagon to help spot strays. Her relationship with Rem remained respectful and distant, though she often caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. They maintained separate sleeping arrangements, and to most of the Cowboys, their marriage seemed to be exactly what they claimed, a practical partnership rather than a love match. But something was changing between them, slowly and almost imperceptibly. It was in the way Rem's hand would linger when he helped her down from the wagon, or how Deanna found herself saving the best portions of meals for him, worrying when he spent long days riding the edges of the herd in bad weather. "You're sweet on him," Cookie observed one evening as Deanna's eyes followed Rem across the camp. "Nothing wrong with that, seeing as he's your husband." "It's not like that," Deanna protested weakly. "This is just an arrangement," Cookie snorted. "I'm old, not blind." "The way you two look at each other when you think nobody's watching, that ain't no arrangement I ever seen." Deanna felt heat rising to her cheeks. "You're imagining things." "Am I? Then why does the boss ride back to the chuck wagon 3 times a day when once would do? Why do you light up like a lantern every time he comes near?" "Why, that's enough, Cookie," came Rem's voice from behind them, causing Deanna to jump in surprise. The old cook merely grinned, completely unrepentant. "Just making conversation with your missus, boss. Nothing improper about that." Rem shook his head, though Deanna thought she detected amusement beneath his stern expression. "Don't you have biscuits to burn?" Cookie chuckled as he shuffled away, leaving Deanna and Rem alone by the wagon. "Sorry about that," Rem said, his voice softer now. "Cookie's always been too free with his observations." "It's all right," Deanna replied, busying herself with wiping down the preparation table to hide her embarrassment. "He means well." Rem leaned against the wagon, his tall frame relaxed but his eyes serious. "We'll be reaching Willow Springs tomorrow. I wanted to warn you, it's a bigger town than I let on before. Sheriff, there is a friend of mine, but news travels if your father's put out word about you." Deanna's hands stilled. "You think we might run into trouble?" "I think we should be prepared for it," Rem said carefully. "It might be best if you stay close to me while we're in town. A married woman with her husband is less likely to draw attention than a young woman alone." The idea of playing the role of devoted wife more openly made Deanna's heart beat faster, though she told herself it was merely fear of discovery. "Will we need to be more convincing?" she asked, not quite meeting his eyes. Rem was quiet for a moment. "Perhaps. But I won't ask anything of you that makes you uncomfortable, Deanna. That was never part of our arrangement." "I know," she said softly. "You've been a man of your word in everything. I trust you, Rem." The admission seemed to affect him deeply. He straightened, clearing his throat. "Get some rest. Tomorrow may be a long day." As he walked away, Deanna realized with a start that somewhere along the dusty trail, her feelings for Remington Quinn had begun to shift from gratitude to something far more complicated. Willow Springs was the largest settlement Deanna had seen since fleeing her father's ranch. The main street bustled with activity, wagons and horses moving in both directions, storefronts offering everything from millinery to firearms, and a proper hotel with glass windows that caught the afternoon sunlight. Deanna rode beside Rem on Willow, her arm linked through his as they made their way toward the general store where the outfit would be resupplying. She wore her dress again, freshly washed for the occasion, and was acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople as they passed. "Remington Quinn, I'll be damned!" A tall man wearing a sheriff's badge stepped out from the jailhouse, his weathered face breaking into a wide grin as he approached them. "Sheriff Donovan," Rem greeted him, dismounting and offering his hand. "Good to see you're still keeping the peace in these parts." "Trying to," Sheriff Donovan replied, shaking Rem's hand vigorously before his gaze settled on Deanna. "And who might this lovely lady be?" Rem helped Deanna down from her horse, his hand lingering protectively at her waist. "This is my wife, Deanna Quinn. Deanna, this is Sheriff James Donovan, an old friend and occasional pain in my backside." The sheriff laughed heartily. "Wife? Well now, that's news. When did you go and get yourself hitched, Rem?" "Few weeks back," Rem answered smoothly. "Sometimes the right woman comes along and you just know." Deanna felt warmth spreading through her at his words, even knowing they were just part of their pretense. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sheriff," she said, offering her hand. Sheriff Donovan took it gently. "The pleasure's all mine, Mrs. Quinn. I never thought I'd see the day this lone wolf settled down." He turned back to Rem. "You two should join me and the missus for dinner at the hotel tonight. She'd love to meet your bride." Before Rem could respond, Deanna noticed the sheriff's expression change as he looked past them down the street. His face hardened, hand moving instinctively to rest on his holstered pistol. "Speaking of trouble," he muttered, "looks like some just rode in." Deanna turned to follow his gaze and felt the blood drain from her face. Riding up the main street, looking trail-worn and dangerous, was Harrison Miller accompanied by two men she recognized as her father's ranch hands. "Rem," she whispered urgently, her fingers digging into his arm. "That's him, Harrison Miller, the man my father wanted me to marry." Rem's body tensed immediately and he shifted to place himself slightly in front of her. "You certain?" "Yes," Deanna confirmed, feeling sick with fear. "The two with him work for my father." Sheriff Donovan glanced between them, picking up on the sudden tension. "Friend of yours?" he asked wryly. "Not exactly," Rem replied, his voice low and controlled. "Sheriff, my wife left some unpleasant circumstances behind. That man was hoping to force her into marriage." Understanding dawned in the sheriff's eyes. "I see. Well, Mrs. Quinn is your lawfully wedded wife now, correct?" "Yes," Rem confirmed. "Married by Judge Michaels at Thompson's trading post 3 weeks ago. We have the papers to prove it," the sheriff nodded. "Then she's under your protection and by extension, mine while you're in my town." He straightened his shoulders. "Let's see what these gentlemen want." Deanna's heart hammered against her ribs as Harrison Miller and his companions noticed them and changed direction, heading straight for where they stood. Miller's thin face, with its perpetual calculating expression, showed surprise and then anger as he recognized her. "Deanna Calloway," he called out as he approached, his voice carrying the oily charm she remembered all too well. "Your father and I have been searching everywhere for you, my dear. He's been sick with worry." "It's Deanna Quinn now," Rem cut in before she could respond, his arm going around her waist in a gesture both protective and possessive. "And I'd appreciate you addressing my wife with more respect, mister." Miller's eyes narrowed as he took in Rem's imposing presence. "Harrison Miller of Miller Banking and Investments. This young woman is betrothed to me, sir. Her father has already signed the contracts." "Betrothed isn't married," Sheriff Donovan interjected. "And from what I understand, Mrs. Quinn here is already lawfully wedded." One of the ranch hands spat on the ground. "Jed Calloway ain't gonna like this, girl. You know what he's like when he's crossed." Deanna found her courage, drawing strength from Rem's steady presence beside her. "I'm well aware what my father is like, Pete. It's precisely why I left. And Mr. Miller, I was never betrothed to you. My father may have made promises without my consent, but I never agreed to marry you." Miller's face darkened with anger. "You ungrateful little," he cut himself off, visibly regaining control. "Mr. Quinn, was it? I'm sure we can come to some arrangement. The girl's father owes me a considerable sum, which her hand in marriage was meant to settle. Perhaps monetary compensation would suffice instead." Rem's expression remained impassive, but Deanna felt his arm tighten around her. "My wife isn't property to be bartered, Mr. Miller. Whatever arrangements you had with her father are no concern of ours." "I think you should move along," Sheriff Donovan added, his hand still resting on his pistol. The ladies made her choice clear. Miller's face contorted with rage before settling into something more controlled and, to Deanna, far more frightening. "This isn't finished," he said quietly. "Jedediah Calloway isn't a man who forgets a debt or forgives a betrayal. You do well to remember that, Deanna." With that parting threat, Miller turned his horse and moved away, the ranch hands following reluctantly behind him. Deanna sagged against Rem's side, trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. "He won't give up," she whispered. "You don't know what he's capable of." Rem's arm remained firm around her waist. "Neither does he know what I'm capable of," he replied, his voice carrying a steely edge she hadn't heard before. "You're my wife now, Deanna. No one's going to take you anywhere you don't want to go." There was something in the way he said it, a fierce protectiveness that went beyond their arrangement, that made Deanna wonder if perhaps Cookie had been right after all. "Sheriff," Donovan cleared his throat. That dinner invitation stands, but I'm thinking you two might want to keep a low profile while you're in town. I'll have my deputy keep an eye on Mr. Miller and his companions." Rem nodded. "I appreciate that, Jim. We need to resupply and move on as quickly as possible. The herd's waiting." As they continued toward the general store, Deanna remained pressed against Rem's side, finding comfort in his steady presence. Their marriage might have begun as a practical arrangement, but facing Miller had made something abundantly clear to her somewhere along the way. She'd begun to think of Remington Quinn as truly her husband, not just in name. The question that troubled her now was whether he felt the same. The hotel dining room was elegant by frontier standards, with actual tablecloths and glass oil lamps that cast a warm glow over the assembled diners. Deanna sat beside Rem, across from Sheriff Donovan and his plump, cheerful wife Martha, trying to appear at ease despite the events of the afternoon. "I still can't believe Rem finally found himself a bride," Martha Donovan said for perhaps the third time, beaming at Deanna. "And such a lovely one at that. You simply must tell me how you two met." Deanna glanced at Rem, uncertain how much of their story to share. He gave her a reassuring nod, taking her hand under the table in a gesture that felt more genuine than performative. "We met when I was in difficult circumstances," Deanna began carefully. "Rem offered me help when I needed it most, expecting nothing in return. I don't know many men who would do that for a stranger." "That sounds like our Rem," Sheriff Donovan agreed, raising his glass. "Always had a soft spot for those in trouble: horses, dogs, people. Don't let that hard exterior fool you, Mrs. Quinn. Your husband's got one of the softest hearts west of the Mississippi." Rem looked almost embarrassed. "Jim's exaggerating as usual, am I?" The sheriff's expression turned more serious. "Who was it that rode 3 days through a blizzard to bring medicine back when half the town was down with influenza 2 winters ago? Who took in those orphaned carpenter boys when nobody else would and saw them safely to their aunt in Denver?" Deanna turned to look at Rem with new eyes, seeing the discomfort on his face at having his good deeds recounted. "I just did what needed doing," Rem said quietly. "Nothing special about that." Martha Donovan smiled kindly at Deanna. That's always his answer, just did what needed doing. As if risking your life for others is as ordinary as saddling a horse. She reached across to pat Deanna's hand. "You've got yourself a good man there, my dear. They don't come much better." "I know," Deanna replied softly, surprised by how much she meant it. The conversation drifted to other topics: the cattle drive, news from back east, the railroad that was rumored to be coming through within a year or two. Deanna found herself genuinely enjoying the evening, almost able to forget the threat that Harrison Miller represented. Almost. As they were finishing dessert, a remarkably good apple pie, the dining room door swung open with enough force to hit the wall. Jedediah Calloway stood in the doorway, his massive frame filling the space, bloodshot eyes scanning the room until they locked onto Deanna. "There you are, girl," he growled, striding toward their table with Harrison Miller a step behind him. "Time to come home and fix the mess you've made." Deanna froze, the pie turning to ash in her mouth as she stared at the father who had tried to kill her. Sheriff Donovan was already on his feet, hand on his pistol, but Jedediah seemed beyond caring about the law. "Mr. Calloway," Rem said, his voice calm as he rose to stand between Deanna and her father. "Your daughter is my wife now. She's not going anywhere with you." Jedediah's face purpled with rage. "Wife? You think some backwoods marriage means anything when I already promised her to Harrison? I'm her father. I decide who she marries." "Not according to the law," Sheriff Donovan interjected. "The lady's over 18 and married of her own free will. She doesn't need your permission for anything." Miller stepped forward, his thin face tight with controlled anger. "Mr. Quinn, I'm prepared to be reasonable. I'll pay you $500 to annul this marriage. That's more than generous." "She's not for sale," Rem replied, his tone hardening. "Not for 500, not for 5,000. Deanna found her voice at last, standing to face the man who had terrorized her for years. "Pa, you tried to kill me. You shot at me as I ran from my own home." She saw several diners gasp at this revelation. "I'm never coming back with you. I'm never marrying Mr. Miller. I have a husband now, a good man who treats me with respect." Jedediah's hand moved toward his belt, where Deanna knew he kept a knife. "You ungrateful little," faster than Deanna could follow, Rem had drawn his pistol and had it leveled at her father's chest. "Don't," he said, the single word carrying lethal intent. The entire dining room had gone silent, every eye on the tableau before them. Martha Donovan had pressed herself back against her chair, her hand over her mouth. The sheriff had his own weapon drawn, aimed at Miller, who had reached inside his jacket. "This is how it's going to be," Rem said, his voice carrying in the silent room. "Deanna is my wife. She's made her choice. You two gentlemen are going to walk out of here, get on your horses, and ride away. If I ever see either of you near her again, I will consider it a threat to my family, and I will respond accordingly. Do I make myself clear?" The deadly calm in his voice sent a shiver down Deanna's spine, not of fear, but of something else entirely. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that Rem would kill to protect her if necessary. Jedediah seemed to recognize the same truth. His hand moved away from his knife, though his eyes remained full of hatred. "This isn't over," he spat. "Yes," Rem replied, "it is." Sheriff Donovan gestured toward the door with his pistol. "I'm giving you gentlemen exactly 1 minute to leave my town before I arrest you both for disturbing the peace. And Mr. Calloway threatening to kill your daughter is a serious offense. I'd think very carefully about your next move." For a tense moment, Deanna thought her father might still try something foolish. But Miller placed a restraining hand on Jedediah's arm, his cold eyes calculating. "Another time," Miller said softly, before turning to leave, practically dragging Jedediah with him. Only when they had gone did Rem holster his pistol, turning immediately to Deanna. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle as he placed his hands on her shoulders. Deanna nodded, though she was trembling. "I will be," she managed. "Thank you." Sheriff Donovan quickly restored order in the dining room, apologizing to the other guests for the disturbance. Martha fanned herself, declaring it the most excitement they'd had since the bank robbery last spring. "I think perhaps we should retire for the evening," Rem suggested, his arm going around Deanna protectively. "We have an early start tomorrow." They bid the Donovans good night with promises to stay in touch and made their way upstairs to the room they'd taken for the night. It was only when the door closed behind them that Deanna realized they would be sharing the same space, a necessity for maintaining their charade as a married couple, but suddenly laden with new meaning after the events of the evening. "I can sleep on the floor," Rem offered immediately, seeming to read her thoughts. Diana looked at the single bed, then back at Rem, struck by how much had changed between them in such a short time. When they'd made their arrangement, she had seen him as a means to escape, a protector. Now she saw so much more: his kindness, his principles, his unwavering support. "No," she said softly, "the bed's big enough for both of us. I trust you, Rem." Something flickered in his eyes, hope, perhaps, or something deeper. "Deanna, what happened tonight, I meant what I said down there. You're my wife, not just on paper anymore." He took a deep breath. "I know this started as an arrangement, but somewhere along the way my feelings changed. If you still want that annulment when we reach Wyoming, I'll honor our agreement, but I wanted you to know I don't want it anymore." Deanna's heart seemed to stop and then race forward. "You don't?" Rem shook his head, stepping closer to her. "I've been trying not to feel this way, telling myself it wasn't fair to you, that you deserved better than a rough cattleman with nothing to offer but a hard life on the trail." "That's not true," Deanna whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "You've offered me more than anyone ever has: kindness, respect, protection, freedom." Her voice broke on the last word. "You've never once made me feel like property to be traded or controlled. Do you have any idea how precious that is?" Rem's hands came up to cradle her face, his touch impossibly gentle for a man of his strength. "I love you, Deanna," he said simply. "I think I started falling for you that first day when you insisted on earning your keep, even though you were hurt and exhausted. I've never met anyone braver." Tears filled Deanna's eyes as emotion overwhelmed her. "I love you too," she admitted, the words freeing something inside her that had been tightly wound for so long. "I didn't know what love was supposed to feel like until you showed me." When Rem's lips met hers, it was nothing like the chaste kiss they'd shared at their wedding. This was a promise, a claiming, a beginning. Deanna melted into him, her arms winding around his neck as years of loneliness and fear gave way to something beautiful and new. Later, as they lay together in the narrow hotel bed, Deanna's head resting on Rem's chest, she listened to the steady beating of his heart and marveled at how life could change so completely in such a short time. 2 months ago, she had been trapped, afraid, with no hope for a future of her own choosing. Now she was truly Mrs. Remington Quinn, with a husband who loved her and a life stretching before them full of possibilities. "What are you thinking about?" Rem asked, his fingers gently stroking through her hair. Deanna smiled against his chest. "About how fleeing for my life turned out to be the best decision I ever made." Rem's quiet laugh rumbled beneath her ear. "Remind me to thank your father someday from a safe distance, of course." "What happens when we reach Wyoming?" Deanna asked, suddenly serious. "Will you keep driving cattle? Will we have a home somewhere?" Rem was quiet for a moment, his hand continuing its gentle path through her hair. "I've been saving for years to buy land of my own. A ranch in Wyoming territory, good grazing land with a creek running through it, a stand of pine trees for building. I have enough now to make it happen." Deanna lifted her head to look at him. "You never mentioned this before." "It didn't seem relevant to our arrangement," Rem admitted. "But now." He smiled, touching her cheek. "Now I'm hoping you might want to build that home with me. It won't be easy at first, frontier living never is. But it would be ours, Deanna. A place where we answer to no one but ourselves." The vision of it filled Deanna with longing, a home of her own, built with love instead of fear. A place where she and Rem could perhaps start a family someday, children who would never know the kind of childhood she had endured. "Nothing worth having comes easy," she said, echoing words her mother had often told her. "I want that life with you, Rem. I want it more than anything." His kiss was a sealing of their new promise, a true marriage born from what had started as mere convenience. Outside their window, the stars shone over Willow Springs, and somewhere to the north, their future waited to be claimed. 5 years later, Deanna stood on the porch of the ranch house Rem had built with his own hands, watching as her husband taught their 3-year-old son Jackson how to sit on his first pony. The little boy's delighted laughter carried across the yard, mingling with the sounds of cattle in the nearby pastures and chickens scratching in the dirt. The Quinn Ranch had prospered beyond their wildest hopes. What had started as a modest operation with the cattle Rem had brought from that first drive had grown into one of the most respected ranches in the territory. They had weathered hard winters, drought, and the typical challenges of frontier life, but they had faced them together. Deanna's hand rested on her rounded belly, where their second child, a daughter, she was certain would be arriving before winter set in. Dr. Wilson had declared her healthier than most women half her age during his last visit, a testament to how much she had flourished in the life she and Rem had built. They had heard, through Sheriff Donovan's occasional letters, that Jedediah Calloway had drunk himself to death 2 winters ago. Deanna had mourned not the father who had tried to sell her, but the man he might have been had grief, and whiskey not consumed him after her mother's death. Harrison Miller had moved east after some financial irregularities at his bank had come to light, his reputation in tatters. The rumors about his previous wives had finally been investigated, though nothing could be proven after so much time had passed. Diana no longer lived in fear of either man. She was Mrs. Remington Quinn in every sense of the word, a respected rancher's wife, a mother, a woman who had found her strength and voice in the wide, open spaces of Wyoming. "Mama, look," Jackson called out, sitting proud and straight on the gentle pony as Rem led them around the yard. "I'm riding just like Papa." "I see you, sweetheart," Deanna called back, her heart full of love for her little family. "You're doing wonderfully." Rem looked up at her, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners in the way that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. The sun had weathered his handsome face, adding new lines that only made him more distinguished in Deanna's eyes. His dark hair now had touches of silver at the temples, but he was still every bit the strong, principled man she had fallen in love with on that cattle drive. When they reached the porch, Rem lifted Jackson from the pony and set him on his feet. "Go help Maria shell the peas for dinner," he told the boy, referring to the kind Mexican woman who helped with cooking and childcare. "Show her how grown-up you are." "Yes, Papa." Jackson scampered off, his energy boundless as always. Rem climbed the porch steps to join Deanna, his hand immediately going to her belly. "How are my girls today?" he asked, dropping a kiss on her forehead. "Restless," Deanna replied, leaning into his embrace. "Your daughter seems determined to practice her riding skills before she's even born." Rem laughed, the sound still as rich and warming as it had been that first time she'd heard it. "Like mother, like daughter, you're the finest horsewoman in 3 counties, Mrs. Quinn. It's only natural she'd follow in your footsteps." Diana smiled, remembering how far she had come from the terrified young woman who had fled her father's house that night 5 years ago. "Do you ever think about how unlikely all this is?" she asked, gesturing to encompass their home, their land, their life together. "How many things had to happen exactly as they did for us to be standing here now?" Rem's arms tightened around her. "I think about it every day," he admitted. "How close I came to never meeting you. How easily we could have passed like ships in the night." His voice grew serious. "When I offered to marry you that day, it was because I wanted to help you. I never imagined how much you would end up helping me, giving me a family, a purpose beyond just acquiring land and cattle." Deanna turned in his arms to face him, her hands framing his beloved face. "You became my freedom, Rem, and somehow, along the way, I became yours too." "The best kind of freedom," he agreed, leaning down to kiss her properly, "is the kind we build together." As the sun began to set over their Wyoming ranch, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Deanna Quinn thanked whatever fate or providence had led her to flee into the arms of the man who had become everything to her: protector, partner, lover, friend. The marriage that had begun as an escape had transformed into the truest kind of love story, one written not in desperate flight, but in the daily choice to build a life together, come what may. And as Rem's hand found hers, fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing, Deanna knew with absolute certainty that this was the freedom she had always been meant to find.